Hello, welcome to Healthy Kingston. I'm Janet Wade. First on our agenda, I would like to introduce our newly re-elected member of the Board of Health, who is our chairman, Joe Casna. Joe, congratulations. And I've asked you to be on the program to just update us on what's been going on with the Board of Health.
Well, good afternoon, Janet. And yes, both myself and Bill Caval will be returning for another 3-year term on the Board of Health with you and Heidi Whipple and Dennis Randall. As far as what's going on these days, as you know, it's been very busy. And this is also a very busy time of year for the Board of Health. We've got an awful lot of things going on. I heard, well, I was just listening to the conversation pertaining to mosquitoes and ticks and the problems that they create for us. But it seems a lot of people I hear lately talking will refer to the virus in the past tense. And that could not be more inaccurate. That virus is still with us. It's still wreaking of bringing up problems, and we still have to be concerned with that all the time. Public health nurse puts a lot of time into that. The clinics are still open. The vaccines are still being given out, and that's still taking up an awful lot of time at the Board of Health. In addition to that, it's been more difficult because over these past 5, 6, 8 weeks, we have not had the services of a full-time health agent. As you know, we are in a process where we're trying to hire a replacement for Kieran Keller, whose aspirations went in a different direction, and he's no longer with us. We're hoping that within the next few weeks, we will have a successful candidate that we're looking to hire. And that will bring some stability to the office and open some other doors for some activities that we can start to get involved in. We've got beaches are going to be opening up, pools are going to be opening up, backyard activities, all of these things. And we've got food trucks to inspect, restaurants to stay up with, septic systems, of course. The real estate market's been hot. All of these things keep everybody really busy at the Board of Health. Arthur Boyle has been doing a great job holding down the fort for us. Again, that's pretty much where we are at this point. Unless you know I missed something,
Nope, I think you've covered it. And if anyone needs additional information on the clinics, the upcoming clinics, particularly those of you who are over 50 and have underlying health conditions, and those over 65, there are clinics that are coming up in the month of May, and they're listed on the website. So please become familiar with that. Also, the public health nurse now has a tab in the website which has information in it pertinent to different health issues that are timely in the town. So, and being that the Kingston Reporter will no longer be publishing the Board of Health's article, Healthy Kingston Clipboard, will be now ending, and you can look on the website in the nurses tab to get health information. We had an extensive discussion last month on water runoff and its implications for the town. And we realized that there were so many other environmental issues that we should be addressing and their impact on our town. So Matt Panella, who is our conservation agent, and Pine duBois, who is the executive director of the Jones River Watershed and the president of the related nonprofit Jones River Landing, are back to speak with us this month on a number of, again, very timely topics having to do with our local environment. So thank you both very much for being here again. It's appreciated. Ticks. This is a big season for ticks and mosquitoes. And we're all aware that they bite people and they bite animals, and they are parasites, and that we need to be very mindful of them during this season and for the next few months. So what I would first like to ask is, where do we typically find them in Kingston? And I'll just throw that out to you, Matt.
I guess I'll deal with ticks first. And ticks you're going to find typically in forested areas or in areas with tall vegetation. They're not typically found in people's lawns and gardens, but you hear a lot of reports out of the last couple of years of that sort of thing. The thing about ticks is, I speak as somebody who has had several tick-borne illnesses,
Really?
Lyme disease and anaplasmosis. But being a wildlife professional ecologist, I'm out in that habitat all the time.
Wow.
There, you have time, right? When a mosquito bites you, it's bitten you, whatever it has is in your bloodstream. A tick does not pass any illness on to you for their different lengths of time, depending on which source you look at, but roughly 24 hours, right? As a guide that I use, where you have time to find them, and if properly removed within that time frame, you're fine. So the fear over ticks, while valid, can be dealt with by being diligent. I have a 4-year-old, and every night tick checks before bed, and that's just what we do. So it is definitely a valid health concern. Those types of diseases seem to be on the rise, but they can be defended by just diligent checks.
And I know you mentioned proper removal.
Yeah.
So what would that entail?
Yeah, that's very important. The way that their body is structured, they have to feed for a certain period of time before they can regurgitate. So that's why it takes a certain time period for them to pass any sort of disease onto you. But if you were to grab a tick and squeeze it, then you're forcing it to do that. So there are all sorts of different tools that are made. Some people use tweezers. Basically, what you need to do is get as low as possible under the body, sort of using my fingers as if you can see, get as low as possible under the body and get around the head, and then lift from there so that you're not squeezing their abdomen. Anything that you do, including tweezers, if you have a tweezer that can't get under the body to the head, then you're risking squeezing the abdomen and making them pass some sort of a sickness onto you.
Huh, that's interesting. I know for me, an issue has been leaving some of it in, trying to get the entire tick so that you're not exposed to some of it.
That is, so when you don't get the whole head out, in most cases, from my understanding of it, you're not risking getting a disease that way. It's an irritation thing. So at that point, you have a foreign body in you, and it can get really irritated and red around there as your body rejects the head, which is a foreign body, and eventually it dispels it. And there is risk of infection in those situations, but not Lyme disease or any of the other sicknesses, provided that you lifted the tick the correct way and did not squeeze the abdomen.
Right. And speaking of infection, you had mentioned that, you have within 24 hours to remove the tick. Also, there can be the potential of redness at the site and possible infection. So always seeing a physician, possibly getting on antibiotics may be an option if you see, in my mind, if you see that the area is red and irritated. And particularly if there's a fever, there's chills, a rash.
Yeah, so I have had doctors before give me preventative doses of the typical antibiotic that's used for Lyme disease or tick illness is doxycycline. And it's typically a long, heavy dose, which does a number on your GI system and the rest of your body. But there's a 2-day cycle that I've had doctors give to me to have on hand, where if I had a tick that I was concerned potentially may have been in me long enough, that I could take that 2-day cycle of doxycycline, and that should kill off any of the spirochetes or anything you have in your body at that point before they can get established.
Okay. Okay, so we've talked about symptoms, we've talked about exposure, removal, prevention. So how do we even prevent being exposed to ticks?
I would say staying indoors is not an option. Staying out of the wilds is not an option, because that's not good for your mental and emotional health.
Exactly.
There's a lot of different things people do. A lot of people will tuck their pants into their socks. A lot of people will wear lighter colors so that you can see them easier when they're crawling on you. At my previous job, I was in the field a lot, and we would have our clothes treated. There's a company called Insect Shield, and you could send clothes off to them and they will treat it with a permethrin-based solution that can last, they say, 75 washes. And it can kill any arthropod that's crawling on your clothing. So for mosquitoes, that could work, but chances are it may have already bit you by the time it dies. But with ticks, with them crawling up your legs, you can see them crawling, and then just sort of curl up and fall off of you. So treated clothing is definitely a good way to go. If you're treating your own clothing with permethrin, there's a lot of caution needed there. Permethrin's really bad for human beings when it's in its wet form. Once it's dried, it's supposedly safe. But you know, make your own judgments from there on that. But it is a valuable tool for that.
Okay. And heard dog collars, you can use them around your ankles as far as preventing any kind of ticks and mosquitoes, particular fleas too. Those are helpful, and also spray with DEET is helpful as well to prevent yourself from mosquitoes and potentially ticks too.
There are other, I want to say organic, there are essential oil based treatments made out of either cedar oil, lemongrass oil, garlic oil that can be used around your yard. That can act as a deterrent and can kill ticks on contact. So there are several different types of those products that I know people have used with some success. And you're not spraying it all around your entire property, you're spraying it around the area that you spend time in, just to make sure that when you're on your lawn, you don't have anything making their way in from there.
Got it. So along with this discussion, and Pine, you could enter in here, you would like, is aerial spraying, particularly for mosquitoes at this point. I know you both come at it from a little bit different perspective, and I think it's important that everyone hear both and get a well-rounded picture.
Well, I don't think aerial spraying is something that is proposed or used for ticks. I
Or
think
mosquitoes at this point.
yeah, for mosquitoes, it's an emergency measure, generally speaking, that the state uses, because a long time ago, aerial spraying of pesticides was outlawed. We used to do it in the state of Massachusetts for gypsy moth caterpillars and stuff like that. So we were spraying all kinds of, Sevin and malathion and stuff like that. And eventually people grew into an understanding that that wasn't such a great idea for the environment generally, and wasn't necessarily solving our problem either. As far as mosquitoes are concerned, let me just address that for a second, because not every mosquito is a killer mosquito. There's a lot of species of mosquitoes out there, and some of them have a purpose in our environment and in the ecosystem. The problem that we have is that people have gotten to the point where they're detached from what's going on around them in their yards. And so, if we have bird baths, for instance, you will grow mosquito larvae in your bird bath. You will grow mosquito larvae in your rain gutters if the leaves and the pine needles plug up the exit, right?
Right.
And tens of thousands of them will procreate there, and it becomes a nuisance. And then you call up mosquito control and you say, come spray me. Those aren't necessarily triple E bearing mosquitoes or West Nile bearing mosquitoes, but people think they are. And it's because there's an abundance of mosquitoes, and there's an abundance of mosquitoes because nobody knows how to, dump out their kiddie pool or their buckets or their tires, or clean their gutters or their bird baths. And when I say clean your bird baths, you got to do it 2 or 3 times a week. It's not like do it once a summer, or when it gets so disgusting you can't stand it anymore. You have to maintain it like you would maintain your kitchen, really, in the outside, if you're going to be outside. And I think that's the point where where I diverge from a lot of people. I feel like all of this is on us. If you're going to mow your grass and you're going to plant your garden and you're going to, you know, take your dogs to the dog park and stuff, you can maintain the property in such a way that you're a good neighbor to everybody else. Because when we do spray, and especially when we allow an incidence of the mosquitoes that do carry triple E or West Nile, that is a public health problem, and it is very difficult to contain it. And so that's why the state resorts to aerial spraying. But as we found out a couple of years ago, not all spray is good spray. And we don't know as much as we need to know when we take it upon ourselves to universally apply something. And in the case a couple of years ago, they found that there was PFAS in the containers that was carrying the antbill that was supposedly so okay. And it wasn't okay, because now we have PFAS in our water supplies, and we're one of the reasons why. So, you know, I think spraying should always be a last resort. I think it is in our arsenal of ways that we can protect our community. But I do not think that we are managing it in such a way that is using it as a last resort. We're more using it as a oh, let's make ourselves feel better, and the government doesn't want anybody to die because they didn't aerial spray. And
Okay, with that, thank you. Unfortunately, we're time limited. Matt, how would you speak to this?
Yeah, I'll just add that the state is currently in the process of trying to overhaul their aerial spray program. They've tried to work something where they take advice from different groups to get towards something of a more holistic program for that. But I agree with Pine 100% that prevention is the best measure, the same way with ticks. I could go through anybody's property, including my own, and find a few sources that are growing mosquitoes. Gutters are a huge one. Beyond what she mentioned with making sure none of these sources are collecting water, they make products, I can only think of a name brand called Mosquito Dunks or Mosquito Bits. And I use the Mosquito Bits on my property. They're little granules that contain a bacteria called my
BTI.
BTI. It's a bacillus bacteria that will only affect mosquitoes in their larval stage. The mosquito larvae actually have to eat that bacteria in order to have it go through their system and kill them. But it's something you can do. Let's say you can't reach a water source, you can't clean your gutters, but you suspect that they're collecting some water. You throw a little bit of that up there, and you just try to time it so that you're breaking up their life cycle.
What are they? Are they granules, or what are they?
Little granules, or the dunks are like little discs, like maybe that
Donuts.
big that you can throw. And I'm not recommending that people go and do that in natural aquatic systems, but it's a way that you can try to minimize production on your property without needing to go the spray route. Because for me personally, I have a bigger problem with local commercial mosquito spraying than I do with the aerial spraying, because now what we have, out of, again, a sort of widespread fear of diseases like triple E and West Nile virus, you've had, and mosquito control often, you know, they have a lot going on and they're hard for them to keep up with the requests. You've had a lot of private companies pop up overnight, and they're growing like crazy to fill that void. And they're starting spraying in April, and they're spraying people's properties through the year at, you know, a large financial, you know, it's probably, I don't know, average, let's say, of $50 a trip, and they're coming weekly. And that's to essentially make people feel more comfortable and remove the mosquito populations from their property. At the same rate, there's a biodiversity crisis going on right now, and specifically with insects. Insects are declining in a lot of areas, and they're declining because of habitat destruction and the way that we treat our properties. But right now, you have companies spraying insecticides during the day when all of the bees, butterflies, other pollinators are flying around, and they're bringing mist blowers to people's properties and spraying the entire property. And that, to me, is a much bigger concern for human health, because we don't know the long-term effects of our kids rolling around in that stuff for their whole life. But for every other species that's supposed to be growing and using our properties and supporting a food web, essentially. And that's my fear right now.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Pine, I would think that you would agree with that.
I absolutely do.
Next, overbuilding versus green space. We have a lot of new developments popping up in the town. Either of you like to speak to that? Matt?
Yeah, I often refer back to a study that Audubon did where they looked at every town in Massachusetts. I believe it was between 2013 and 2017. And they looked at the percent of open space land, the percent of open space land that had been lost over that time period to development. And Kingston ranked 4th worst in the state for the proportion of the town that was developed during that time frame. The population of Kingston has not risen any significant amount during that time period, but a lot of land has been developed during that time period. We have a time-lapse video that we use from Google Earth that you can see Kingston from, I believe it's the early 80s through present, and see how Kingston's changed over that time period. Where we're at right now is we're at all the parcels essentially that nobody ever either wanted to develop or felt that they could develop based on our wetland regulations. And so what they're doing now is getting really creative and bringing forward projects that need extensive review by the commission. And what they're doing is they're putting people and families in closer contact with our wetlands where mosquitoes breed, to bring it back to the last conversation. So you're bringing now situations where people feel that they need to treat mosquitoes on their property because they live so close to these wetlands. And it works both ways, because now we're affecting those wetlands in turn.
Wow, very sobering information. So with that in mind, and both of you have alluded to this earlier, the loss of biodiversity and abundance of fauna, insects in our town. Pine, do you want to speak to that any further?
Well, I mean, that's basically what we try to do. I mean, the whole point of our dam removals and improvements to stormwater and so on is about bringing the native species back and the migrating species back so that they can control the environment, because the environment being an ecosystem, as Matt will definitely tell you, there's a balance there. And when you have that balance, those diseases and those adverse insects and whatnot don't dominate you. When you lose your diversity and you lose the balance of nature, that's what happens. When people start building in wetlands, they're altering the habitats that sustain the populations that we need. You know, and we're at the point right now with the fisheries, for instance, at all-time lows for river herring and American eels, and they're not the only species. You know, striped bass and everything else is on the decline. Cod is on the decline. Why? Because we're not being good stewards of the environment. We're building where we shouldn't build. We're taking too much, and where we don't take, we make it impossible for these species to breed and to continue. And it's to our own detriment, and you know, we can do better. And so if we rein ourselves in terms of where we're developing and how we're developing and what we're doing with the lands that we do develop, we'll be able to bring the ecosystem and the balance back. And we really need to do that for our own welfare as well as the rest.
I'd like to add a little bit to that if I could.
Yes.
Some people have a mind frame like we're separate from nature, and that's because we're civilized and we live the way we live, we build houses, but we're not. We're not separate from the ecosystem. New York City only exists because you can use the resources off-site. You need water, you need food, you need fresh air, and most of it is not produced within the city limits. It's the same thing in any town, in any area. We need that. And in order to have that, you need intact ecosystem. You need all of that ecological web. Every species is important in that. I highly recommend anybody who has any interest or just has a thought about this to read anything by Doug Tallamy. And what he brings forward is that it's on us and our property, on your property, you can boost biodiversity and help with all of this and prevent species from disappearing.
Well, very excellently put by the two of you. I really appreciate this conversation. I know we're going to talk about sand mining, which to me is certainly encompassed in the comments that you just made. Is there anything either one of you would like to incorporate into the discussion versus that?
Well, I mean, what we're facing in southeastern Massachusetts right now is a huge huge industry development around sand mining, and it's being done under the guise of solar development, which is really unfortunate. I'm a big fan of solar development, but I think the solar should be developed on the rooftops and in the parking lots and in the transmission lines, not, you know, go next to the cranberry bog, strip down the trees, destroy the habitat, and excavate the tallest hill that's around in order to get the sand and the money that's associated with it, and then put solar up and get smart money from the state for that. That is not what we need to do in terms of having a green energy program in Massachusetts or anywhere else. What's going on in southeastern Mass is the largest sand and gravel mining operation east of the Mississippi. And it's destroying one of the 3 globally rare ecosystems that we have in southeastern Massachusetts. I mean, it's one of the 3 in the world is in southeastern Massachusetts, and it's being destroyed by this. It shouldn't be done. Sand is becoming a very precious commodity. I heard somebody say recently, it's the only thing that we need more of is water. So, you know, put that in, you know, and in our area, the sand is purifying the water. So you take out the sand, you're also lowering the area to sea level rise. If it's next to a river and a stream, which most of these sites are, you're doing triple the damage. And so I really think that it's a significant problem that we have to take a hard look and reverse the trend.
And Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, this whole area sits over a massive aquifer. And like Pine just said, the sand filters our water, and everything we do with stormwater is to try to get infiltration, right? Not to let it run off directly in our wetlands. You want it to filter through the soil and all that sand before it reaches the aquifer, where by that point we can tap it and drink it. But when you have these large scale earth removal operations remove all of that sand, they may stop at a level that someone deems is safe for the aquifer, but you've removed a huge amount of protection from it. And then after that, you develop the area, and then you have runoff, and then you're affecting the aquifer at that point. We're affecting our future drinking water. And the thing about sand, it's incredibly valuable right now. It's not going to get any less valuable. It's a finite resource. The sand that's in the desert is useless for construction. The sand that we have here is valuable, but you can only take it once. So once we take the sand from southeastern Massachusetts, somebody's going to get rich off of taking that sand. It's not going to be the people that are left behind living here with an impacted aquifer afterwards and lowered biodiversity.
Wow. Well, I've learned a tremendous amount from the 2 of you, and we're very fortunate as a community to have people like yourselves who are overseeing our environment and from whom we can get instruction. And I hope people are seriously taking into consideration all the valuable information that you've given us. And the bottom line from what you both said is that we all need to be very good stewards of our environment and not take it for granted, and realize that once we damage it, it may, as you were saying, Matt, about the sand, it may be gone forever. And I want you to show Matt your son's eel picture. So obviously you're being a good role model to him.
Yeah, we had a great time at the Plymouth Herring Run Festival on Saturday, and he painted this picture of an eel right here.
Uh-huh.
So, and the eels tie back into the mosquito thing, because as Pine
They're the biggest
Jones
predator.
River has shown, they eat a ton of mosquito larvae when they're growing up.
Right, they do. So perfect example of as adults and parents and grandparents, we need to be mindful of our environment and passing down our thoughts on it and being good stewards to our children. So with that, thank you both very, very much. We're fortunate to have you.